Welcome to Thinking Deeply About Primary Education, the podcast that makes time and space to think about pedagogy, teaching and learning, professional development, anything of interest to time poor but enthusiasm rich primary teachers. This week, I'm joined by Adam Kohlbeck and Chris Passey. So, Adam and Chris, it's lovely to see you. Thank you very much for joining me. How are you?
Yeah, brilliant, Kieran. Really glad to be here at the beginning of a busy week and a busy term. But yeah, really excited to talk to you about all things deputy headish.
It's great to be here. Thank you so much. My wife has been a massive fan of this podcast since before I even started in this role, and so slight fangirling. I'm not ashamed to say that.
I mean, that's far too much pressure. You know, that whole "you should never meet your heroes" kind of situation. it's it's never positive. But you know, it's good. I mean, I've been a big fan of your work for a long time, guys. You've sort of you move in a lot of similar spheres. You know, like Adam, you and I are going to speak at Research Aid Munich in a couple of weeks. You know, big fan of the podcast work you guys do. For anyone who hasn't isn't familiar with your work, how would you describe how you got here and how you got to where you are today?
Chris is a far better orator and storyteller than I, so I'll hand over to him for to tell this bit, because it is a really cool story, I think, as to how we kind of started and got to what we're doing now.
Well, yeah, we met doing a master's in educational leadership with Coventry University, and I was the student rep, which nobody in my life was surprised about, that I'd managed to force my way into that position to kind of get things done. And it just got a little bit more work than I needed, and so I needed another rep to come on board, and somebody called Tracy jumped on, and then somebody called Adam was like, I'd like to help. And we just kind of clicked really in terms of what we knew we wanted to say. And we started these conversations just by kind of going, everything's so binary right now. Everything's black. This is kind of 2 or 3 years ago, possibly maybe even 4 years ago. It's just black and white. You're either, if you think one thing, you're a Nazi and you're evil, and if you think another, you're a weirdy woke lefty or an edgy lad. And there was no space for the grey area. And so we thought, it'd be really cool if we could occupy that grey area, try and get different sides talking to each other. Could we try and bring the conversation, bring other people into the conversation? We actually started out as KP Education. I don't know if you remember that, Adam. But then we sounded like a nut, and we didn't think that was going to particularly sell what we were after. And then we hit on EduPulse and thought, this, the kind of name, we've got a finger on the pulse of things that we want to talk about. And it all started rolling from there, really. And actually, the big thing that got us kicking off was actually writing the book. And as you know, I mean, these things take years. It's been 2 years now since we started writing it, and it's only just about to come out. So that's kind of been fueling the process and the kind of the wheels of the machine. So, and we just happen to get on really, really well as well. So, he's a good guy, and I think we're big fans of each other, which helps, because if I didn't like him, it would be a bit awkward.
And that would be a lot of time to spend with someone who you don't like if you're going to write that book together. Because I can imagine the conversations you guys have had over the last 2 years. And so, I mean, that's going to be the focus of our episode today. I mean, we can talk about loads of stuff, but succeeding as a deputy head, I think, really, really important, sometimes undervalued. Deputy is really interesting because you can both be operational and you can also be strategic pedagogically, and my sort of interests are pedagogic in nature. And so I think, yeah, having something where two people who've executed the role to a very high level and are able to look at the nuance, like you say, not sort of black and white position taking, I think really, really powerful. So I'm really excited to explore that with you guys today. And so I think many teachers describe the step from middle to whole school leadership as a bit of a shock to the system. In fact, Chris, it's the same shock or similar shock to the one you're talking about, moving from deputy to head teacher. What do you see as the most significant mindset shift that a new deputy head needs to make in order to thrive rather than simply survive?
I think that's, I think an interesting place to start with that is probably what the shift isn't, because I hear a lot of people talk about, the biggest shift is that you've kind of got this really different relationship with everybody now. You've got to hold people to account more, and that requires a bit more distance, etc. That's certainly not been my experience. I think that as you go up the sort of educational leadership ladder, as it were, I think that relationships are central to everything, right the way through. And I think that relationships are ultimately rooted in authenticity and vulnerability, which are like two big things that we try and write about in the book. And so I don't think I'd necessarily align with this view that like you have to suddenly change your relationships with people when you become a deputy or become a senior leader of any kind. I don't think it's necessarily got to be different from the relationships you had with them when you were a middle leader. I think probably in some ways the biggest shift is that rather than having that natural outlet to do the things that you're talking about, you now need to create that outlet. So for me as a deputy, so I lead on teaching and learning, but and sort of assessment, PD, curriculum. But if I'm talking about, I don't know, the behavior policy or a particular behavior strategy that we want everybody to have a go at using and adapting for their classes, I don't have that natural way of using it myself because I don't have that class that I'm teaching day in day out. And so I have to try to kind of engineer that opportunity for me to go and use it in practice by teaching somebody else's class, or when I'm covering classes, making sure that I'm using it as well. But then the really tricky part of that is that so much of what makes these things work is the relationships and the routines that class teachers have with their classes, and you don't have that as a senior leader. And that's one of the biggest, I think that's probably the single biggest challenge of stepping into senior leadership, but also still trying to have an influence on teaching. And I guess just to bring it back to a little bit of research, so there was a paper that Berliner did in 1988, and they essentially took like a group of expert teachers, a group of novice teachers, and they said, right, teach this group of 15 students that you've never met before. We want to see the differences in what the expert teachers do in comparison to the novices. And out of this group of expert teachers, like two of them walked out and refused to take part. Another two or three, I think, broke down in tears. Another one described it as like the most harrowing experience of their lives. And it was like, well, what's caused all that? It's because all of the routines and relationships that these great teachers had with their classes were now useless to them because they'd never met this group of 15 students before. And I think that's kind of something that stayed with me when I stepped into senior leadership, is that you're not going to have that natural use of routine and relationship that you can pull on to show your most effective self. But yet you still got to go into those classes and teach and model things that you want to spark discussion about.
It's powerful, but I think what's even more powerful is to say right from the start, every single deputy head role is as different depending on your context to the next. It's so easy to say, well, this is how to be a deputy head, but mine and Adam's experience of deputy headship is chalk and cheese. It's completely different. My setting is a lot smaller, and therefore my role was multifaceted in ways in which a deputy head pastoral in a larger school or maybe a big secondary school just wouldn't be. And I think one of the things that we try and talk about, one of the chapters is about establishing relationships, and I think it's the second chapter after how do you talk to your teacher, is really just trying to look at moving from doing to delegating, and how we've got to try and recognize that any organization, even a small one, is too large for one person to make any decision. So that effective deputy headship kind of moves away from the hands-on involvement towards that more broader managerial focus. And that requires a willingness on your part to delegate and a willingness to invest in relationships, which, as Adam just said, you might not have had before. We're a bit research mad. So Lehman et al. In 2019 kind of picked out 3 different areas: consistency, about being true to yourself; conformity, which is about peacefully coexisting with your colleagues; and connection, which is about you acting through your genuine interest in the cultural diversity of the place you're in. And all of these mindset shifts, which is essentially what we're talking about, going from that thriving to surviving, sitting in that role, shutting your mouth, opening your eyes and your ears, and kind of going, who are the people around me? What are the gaps in my skill set? Can I fill those gaps with the skills of other people? And the fact that it's entirely possible. Well, what we want is for people to come away reading this book kind of going, I could do this. Or if they're doing it and they're struggling, to go, I can survive this. Or if they're doing it and they're surviving, going, I'm doing it right. I think this is good. Or I'm going to get in touch with Chris and Adam because actually I think they're wrong. We're putting out all of these things, but that moving from the doing and the day to day and lifting your head up and delegating. That's one of the most difficult things to do, but definitely an important part of that mind shift.
Yeah, and as you're speaking, I'm actually thinking, first time round, I tried to be too straight laced and too almost like narrow in terms of my personality, and as you're speaking, I'm getting like visceral like sort of memories of the not really being myself and almost pretending to be this deputy head person rather than actually doing being me and like the authenticity you both spoken about. And so I think already, and so I was like, this is something I could have done with reading whenever I was even thinking about taking that step, because there's so much to it, and I love the fact that obviously you guys are giving me research. You please do give me the link so I can share in the newsletter this week, because certainly they sound like, I think, essential reading for anyone who wants to become a school leader. And so I think, yeah, I think that's massive. And like you say, Chris, you don't just do it. You turn up September, and by what are we in 10th November now? You're not a deputy head. It's going to be years and years of executing the role to the you're just getting better every day, isn't it? Really.
I think as well, I think just building on that kind of vulnerability point as well, I think that's probably one of the biggest tools that a deputy head has at their command, really, because I think when you can walk into a staff room and or in a staff meeting, wherever it is where you've got everybody together, and you can say, oh, I don't really have the answer to this bit yet, or I'm not really sure what where we should go with this yet, or like I've done this thing, like what do we all think? Where deputy headship becomes about bringing the conversation together and kind of leading the problem solving in the school rather than being right and convincing others. I think that is a really important mindset shift that I think can move you from being a deputy head to an effective deputy head. I've just left or I'm just leaving, getting ready to leave my school. So I've got a new job starting in January. I told all of the staff on Friday, and like one of the things I said in that kind of speech I gave, I suppose, was that like you can have I'm probably a little bit of I think I'm probably a little bit of a maverick in my school. So there's lots of things that I'm not very good at, and I'm very open about not being very good at those things. And I think that hopefully what that does is it allows everybody else to be okay with being not very good at certain things as well. And I think a little bit like you said earlier, Kieran, if you can kind of cover each other's, and Chris was talking about this, if you can cover each other's weaknesses with your strengths, as long as you've got all of those areas covered, the organization itself thrives. And when you give teachers and middle leaders the responsibility of filling in your weaknesses, and you're really overt about them, I'm not great at this, like I need you to do this bit if you can, it gives them like a real shared sense of purpose. I've got a TA at my place who will stop me in the corridor daily and will say, remember you got that thing today, or remember swimming's happening year 5 this afternoon, you haven't got Mandy because she's off, so you're going to need to get someone to cover that. And they don't mind doing, they're not doing it because they think it's because of, they don't see that as my incompetence, that I've probably not written it down. It's just that's the reality of that person, and I can slot in and use my strength to cover their weakness. And when you're sort of able to direct that and set the sort of cultural tone of that, I think that's the real shift from being a deputy head to being an effective deputy head.
How long do you reckon it took you to get to that point in your place? I mean, are we talking like the best part of a decade, or shorter, do you think?
Well, I don't think I had a choice really, because my weaknesses are so obvious to everybody. I think that it's a good question. I think it probably took me I think it probably took me not very long at my current school, because the culture of the school was already such that like it was a very vulnerable place for people to step into. So in the first 2 years that I was deputy there, we had 5 different head teachers. So obviously something wasn't going quite right, but the only way that you're gonna sort of hold everything together in that situation is by uniting everybody around a shared purpose and being really open and clear about the fact that, well, none of this is going to work if any of us are walking around pretending we've got all the answers. We clearly don't. So I've got these answers. I think that person over there seems to have those answers. That person's willing to go and dig in and try and find that answer over there. Let's just keep coming back together until we feel like we've got enough of the answers to get this place back on track. So I think often it's about the environment that you walk into as well. I'm going to, like I say, I'm going to a new trust in January, and it's definitely something I'm really really aware of. It's like how much vulnerability is the right amount to kind of show on day one, and how much am I comfortable to give on day one. But I think the other mediating factor is like who you are as a person and as a professional as well. And I know that for me, probably my biggest love is people. So I want people to know about me, and I want to know about them. And so I think it's kind of the only way that I sort of can be. And I think Chris is pretty similar with that as well.
Yeah, my settings a lot smaller, and as you said earlier, Kieran, I've recently stepped up to head teacher. The lighting is not doing my hair any justice because it's actually a lot grayer than this.
How do you think I feel?
I'm owning my privilege right now. It is disappearing, but I'm holding on. I'm holding on to that. I work in a very small setting. We're all friends as well as colleagues, and that provides its professional challenges as and when needed. I've also got ADHD, and my amazing team are always around me. My wife has a phrase: put it away, not down, for me, because I'm surrounded by clutter. And the kids have started to say that at school because I've shared it. I've shared it with the staff. Like, is this? They used to kind of say, "Oh, you've left this down. You've put that there." And I'll go, "I'm really sorry. I'll pick that up." And now it's just, I'll put that away for you because I noticed you put it down. But whilst it's a bit tongue in cheek, what I feel that's actually reflective of is a deeper understanding of me, and understanding that actually in that moment, even when I was deputy, because I only stopped being deputy 10 weeks ago or whatever, is that's who I am. It's what makes me me. And we're not talking, and we don't advocate in the book about authenticity and vulnerability, just walking in going, "I'm in a terrible mood, leave me alone." Because you are a part of the leadership system and the team. There might be people in that room who were about to come to you to ask for guidance, and what they should be is inspired by a moment of vulnerability that you've given, not put off by it. And that takes a very, very, very long time, and a lot of mistakes, and a lot of upset people. Maybe you've been upset by it yourself. It's a really, really delicate thing that actually, when we come to your brilliant thinking deeply about primary education, your conferences, that's actually what we've been talking about, is making that measurement, that risk. How much do I give? Is that too much? Is that too much of an exposure? What have I lost? Have I lost respect? Have I gained respect? And that kind of thing, we call that I guess it's an adaptive, isn't it, Adam? You've got that kind of moment of, am I allowed to do this? Will it hurt? And how effective will it make me as a deputy head teacher? And there'll be people out there listening to this going, absolutely not. That's not how I could do it. If I walk into my staff room and go, "Guys, we've got a problem. I don't quite know how to fix it. Can we have a chat?" That people would just walk out the room. I don't want to. That's not the type of leader I want. And I guess that's why this book is so important, because we took such a long time writing it, because we spoke to hundreds of people. We got lots of perspectives, and we tried to get as many different voices of deputies. But there are as many voices as deputies, as I said, as there are deputies. And no one was able to agree on what was the most important thing. But the thing that kept coming up, which goes back to your question, was this mindset shift, and how much relationships were at the heart of that. And if you didn't get that right, you were kind of done for. And then it kind of baffles me that when we have this conversation regarding teachers and students, that very often that concept is thrown out the window as being some kind of soft, woolly idea. You don't need relationships. You tell them what to do and they'll pass their exams and they can move on, to slightly pastiche it. When actually we look at ourselves differently in leadership, in school systems, and go, no, I've got to get this relationship right. Because even in an emergency situation where you've got to take charge of safeguarding and go, this needs to happen, otherwise children are going to get hurt, there's still a relationship there that needs to be formed. So there's not one answer, is there? Really tricky.
No, absolutely.
If you've ever spent your Sunday night wondering how on earth you're going to make tomorrow's maths lessons both coherent and engaging, you'll understand why we created the Story of Maths. It's a complete primary maths curriculum that does the heavy lifting for you. Coherent sequences, representations that make sense, and professional development built in, not bolted on. It's written by teachers for teachers, which means no jargon, no nonsense, and no added sparkle. Just the best of what we know about helping students understand mathematics. If that sounds like the kind of maths curriculum your school deserves, head to alta-education.com/TSOM-overview to take a look.
Because in your book you're foregrounding the idea of people-centered leadership, and that's really basically what we've been talking about. Is there a reconciliation to do between the human/relational side and the role of deputy, where you've got this almost relentless accountability and the demands that come with it of the operational side?
There is definitely. So there's that relational aspect of the role versus the kind of accountability, responsibility part of it. I think it can seem like a paradox, and I think that it can sometimes feel like those two things are in conflict. But then I also think that sometimes that can be overblown a little bit, and I think that it comes back to that thing of rooting everything in relationships and in people. People-centered leadership. I mean, Amjad Ali talks about this a lot, and I know he's doing a lot of work on it at the moment. And I think he's probably like the voice that I've learned most from about this particular idea. And I think a lot of it comes back to like understanding who are these professionals and who are these people that you're working with, and therefore that you want to hold to account. And that accountability point is worth coming back to in a moment as well. But if I know who you are as a person, and I know the extent to which your personal experiences have fused with your professional experiences, then and how those personal experiences have also formed the type of professional that you are, I think what that gives me is a really strong sense of your professional identity. Once I've got a strong sense of what your professional identity is, I've probably also gives me a bit of a clue as to what kind of conversation you're going to be receptive to. There's a member of staff who she won't mind me mentioning, who she doesn't work at school anymore. She went and got a dream job in America. We would have like really full on, like quite heated conversations that never felt like it had like gone too far, or that she'd overstepped a mark or anything like that. And she'd always leave that room and then come back and be like, right, so what you're saying is this and this, and you need, we need me to do this and this and this better. But actually, like the shift that I noticed over time is she would come back and she would say, so we need me to do this. Okay, so we've still got this, like inherent in this is this collective aim that we've got. All right, awesome. That's really good. And I think that if you can always root everything and all of the feedback you're giving and all of the accountability bit that you're giving and all of that stuff, if you can root that in a shared aim, I think that's the real sweet spot of how you manage that paradox. And I think some of that comes back, or all of that actually comes back to this idea of accountability and what it actually is. And we've ended up in education with accountability being a hierarchy. We've blogged about this actually recently. So we've got this idea that it's a hierarchy. So head teacher is holding deputy to account, is holding assistant heads to account. But what that does is it ends up making accountability be this thing where I prove to the person one above me that I can make the person one below me do something. And it doesn't always matter too much what that thing is, but like I can get them to do the thing. I think if we remodel that and we go, right, let's make accountability about the aim rather than the structure. So let's have the aim in the middle. Let's think of accountability as a circle. We're all around the outside. We've all got something that we can do to kind of help the collective towards that aim. So head teacher, you're accountable to everybody in the room for doing the thing that you're going to do. Deputy, you're accountable to everybody in this circle for doing the thing that you're going to do. Suddenly, again, it comes back to that vulnerability, because everybody that's not the head and the deputy now has visibility of what the head and deputy are promising to do. And they can also then hold them to account as well, which I then think makes people more comfortable about having those conversations where the head or the deputy says, come on, you said you were going to do this, or you said that this was going to lead to this, and it hasn't, and you've got to go back and look at that again. People are more comfortable with that if they know that the head and the deputy are also comfortable being held to account by other people as well. So I think the big shift is in how we actually view accountability. And if you can drive that as a deputy, I think you go quite a long way to bridging that paradox between like the relational bit and the operational holding to account bit.
Where we really landed on was talking about kind of relational accountability and the concept of kind of shared endeavor. And like Adam said, if accountability is often mistaken for a process of, or a mechanism for judgment and consequences, you're going to have a culture of judgment and consequences. You haven't done it by this date, therefore this is the consequence of that. And I'm not very happy with you. And then all of a sudden you have the teachers are upset, just like the children are upset because they've been told off because they haven't done their job in time. You know, part of our job is to enable and foster that sense of psychological safety. Make sure, you know, you just had an episode on that, how important psychological safety is to everybody in the building. Admitting mistakes, taking those risks without fear of negative consequences, but looking at the shared endeavor and saying that we can have a reconciliation of that by having that shared accountability for processes and for outcomes. But it's done through kind of saying it's outcome driven rather than, so it's not outcome driven, it's process driven, right? So if you make it process driven and it's iterative, it fails to become outcome driven, and you open up this possibility of joy of other things happening. Oh, we didn't expect this to be the consequence of this aim. Oh, haven't we found a much better thing because we've invited it's kind of that stacked teams idea that Shane Leaning and Ephraim Lerner talk about in their book Change Starts Here, that idea that, you know, don't just top slice the teams, take everybody, every stakeholder from your culture and your setting and put them into the team to make that decision. And you know, we don't necessarily find ourselves, Adam and I, aligning with a leadership idea necessarily. I think we accidentally fall into them. Certainly in our masters, you know, we studied this trait leadership and we studied authentic leadership and we studied transformational and transactional and all this. And, you know, we just reckon that, I think we kind of, is it Goldman who's got the golf clubs? Is that right, Adam? I can't, Goldman with the golf clubs analogy. And so it's either Goldman, yeah, thank you. And he's just talking about looking at those skills and saying, which skill am I going to have today? Which kind of leader do I need to be? But if we were going to put a pin in it, I think you're right, Kieran, that people-centered. If you walk into your school and you go, I'm the deputy head, and today I'm going to deputy head today, people are going, what does that mean? What are you going to do? The best days are where you keep your mind open. You have a set of things that you want to try and do, priorities that you might need to try and fix. But if the heart of what you're doing is every conversation, have you considered every conversation acknowledging that there's another person on the other side of it? Have you protected their dignity? Have you protected their agency? And these are some of the things we talk about when fostering trust in a group of people that at some point, because of your role, will look to you for the ultimate decision if the head isn't there. And that's kind of what's baked into it, is that sense of ultimate responsibility. But from experience, you're only going to get that if you're surrounded by a team that is willing to lift you up there. You can't climb there yourself. And if you do ascend there yourself and without a team, you can be people-centered all you like. You'll be on your own, and staff may very well kind of rebel just for we don't know who you are or what you want anymore. So we're just going to get on with teaching the kids if you don't mind, because that's what we need to do. And all these weird projects you want to do, we're not involved, thanks. I'm doing an MPQH at the moment and really enjoying it. But one of the things I'm struggling with is the idea of some of the concepts of here's what you need to do to do a project. Here's the EEF guidance. Make sure you do these 4 things and the project will be great. And Adam and I sit and chat it about different iterative ways of getting that done. And I'm like, get everybody in a room. Let's all chat together. And they're like, yeah, but you're in a small school. It doesn't, you know, it's different to our setting. And I just sit there all rebellious and just go, well, you could though, couldn't you? You could try it a different way. It doesn't have to be top down, which circles all the way back to Adam's point about holding each other to account in a way that is building trust and building relationships and decency, which is actually what the book was originally going to be called. A little bit of trivia there for you. It was going to be called something like The Decent Deputy, and how to lead with decency. But the publisher was a bit like, that's a bit non-descriptive. What does that word mean? So yeah, we dropped that title pretty quickly.
Can I just jump in there really quickly? So just on that, like this whole accountability thing and psychological safety bits, I think it's probably one of the most interesting parts of leadership and of like the whole leadership conundrum. And I think, Kieran, your question was around like how do you deal with this paradox of like wanting everything to be really relational, but also knowing that you have to do the operational part of the role as well, and that often involves like holding people to account. Sometimes the best organizations are the ones not where somebody's having to find out the things that need holding to account, but where people are sticking their hands up and going, oh, there's something's gone wrong here, or oh, I think I've made a mistake over here. And I'm sure lots of people have heard of it, but many people probably haven't. Amy Edmondson did some really interesting research around with medical teams in the late 90s. I think it might even have been 1999. And she found initially that she was comparing the success. She was comparing really successful medical teams with less successful medical teams, and she found that the most successful teams were actually appearing to make more mistakes. She was like, that's a bit odd. Let me dig into this a bit more. And the more she dug into it, she found that actually the less successful teams were making just as many mistakes. They just weren't talking about them. So what that tells you is that if you want a really successful team, you want people to have to be comfortable enough and confident enough to stick their hand up and go, "Oh, something's gone wrong here." If people do that, you don't need to do the horrible, like digging deep, monitoring bit in quite the same way to try and find out what's going wrong. People are just going to tell you, and then you deal with it together in that circle.
First of all, I love the idea of having like a 3-wood day. We're going to need to get the big clubs out to lead. I can only imagine what that might involve. But I mean, the word you're describing, the leadership styles you're describing, or the approach to leadership you're describing, sounds both eminently sensible and almost, I think, one step removed from a lot of people's experience in education. I don't know if that's an unfair generalization, but my interpretation over a lifetime in education has been there's a lot of archaic ideas around leadership, a lot of like a mishmash of things from the world of business that don't necessarily make schools effectively run. Are we relying on having really like reasonable and open head teachers to allow that almost circular accountability? Because it sounds like you've either by fortune or by design, I mean, it sounds like you had a couple of goes at finding the right head teacher for your school, Adam. Is it a case of having the right person in the right place, or is this something all deputy heads and all school leaders and teachers could enjoy with almost like the right, I don't know, shift in the conversation more generally? Even if like if it was on the MPQH, and there was a discussion about this type of leadership and this type of approach, do you think everyone can enjoy that?
I definitely don't think that it's kind of like the reserve of deputies who are fortunate enough to have heads that facilitate it. Much easier if you do, without any shadow of a doubt. But I do think that it's possible for deputies to conduct themselves in a way that does embrace professional vulnerability and does kind of cultivate a trust between yourself and other staff, that means that people will put their hand up and go, oh, I'm struggling with this. I'm having a bit of an issue with this. Like, I think it's about looking for the clues that people give you that you are moving along that journey, if it's something that you want to do. So we had Rob Coe actually come into our place not long ago, just to look at some of the coaching stuff we've been doing. I've got a big interest in instructional coaching, and Rob came in and spoke to a couple of the teachers that we've been coaching at school, and two of them separately said that they've never felt like the coaching they've had has been an attempt to fix them. Now, to me, that was a really nice indicator of like, that's what I want people to feel. Like that very small niche part of my job, that is definitely how I want that to land. I want teachers to feel like we're problem solving together in any aspect of school life. And so it's clearly feeling like that to these two, at least in that one very precise area of one-to-one coaching. So I think that it's, that I don't think is necessarily to do with what my head teacher is doing. I think that's very much to do with like with me and like the relationship that I've cultivated with those people, and the way that I've decided to lead that particular area of school life. Much easier if your head teacher does align with that as well, because then a head teacher could in theory undermine that by going, that's all very well and good. You do that one-to-one coaching over there, but I'm going to go around with a clipboard and a rag rating sheet every third day around every classroom, and that would undermine that ethos. But I definitely think that it's possible for a deputy to carve out this particular identity for themselves, even if you're in a school that maybe doesn't align as strongly with it. I wouldn't recommend staying there long term, but it is definitely doable.
I definitely hear the kind of the cries of, well, that's not my school. Those two sound like they have a really good time. Aren't they lucky? It's, you asked earlier whether it was the better part of a decade to get into this swing of things. And possibly I was a deputy head for nearly 9 years. And I only just felt like I got the swing of it with my head teacher, who is kind of this awe-inspiring, amazing, inspirational person with all of these crazy ideas that just appear to happen out of nowhere. But alongside that, as her deputy, I took it very seriously. And I'm not saying that other deputies aren't taking it seriously. What I took seriously was what Adam said, which was carving out my space, what I was good at. As an English teacher, I'm talking to my students about, if you want to know the authorial intent, you have to look at the tone. And in order for the tone to be found, you've got to look to the author's language. And I think very similarly as a leader, the words I use, the way I act is going to reflect my tone and therefore my intention of what I want to. If it's a difficult Monday morning conversation to have with everybody because I've got to deliver some news that's a bit tricky, or we need to talk about a pastoral issue that's going to affect everybody, then my tone and the language that I choose is really important. And it's okay to stop and say, we need to think about this, because people might listen to this and go, yeah, obviously. But sometimes it's important to put your foot on the brake and go, hang on a second. No matter what type of head teacher you've got or what type of school you're in, these things are important. So if you can throw your hands up and go, oh, that's really easy, why are you even giving me that advice? It's because it's clear, it's clean, and it works. And try not to bias kind of some things we might talk about later. When you're looking at this kind of, slightly linking back to accountability, if you are carving out a space for yourself where trust is a palpable physical thing. Have you done this? Yes, I have. Great. Can I see it? For us, that's trust. It's something you can touch and you can hold. Trust isn't, have you done it? Yes, great. That's hope. And if you deal in hope, you're dealing in danger, and you're dealing in people being human beings and forgetting or not really putting their all into something because they're tired. And 9 times out of 10, we are not getting up every day as teachers across the country about to go and do something bad on purpose. Most of us are up, ready to go, ready to do the right next thing or the next right thing. And I think if you spend your time carving that out and the teachers in the school start responding to that, then if you've got a particularly tricky head teacher, and you may well do, or you're listening to this and you are that tricky head teacher, I've met a few that are just like, I couldn't have you as my deputy. Absolutely, coming in here telling me what to do. I like it this way, this way, and this way. My school, my rules. It's worked for me, so why change? Then that's fine. But there's going to be a point where you either leave, like Adam said, or the head isn't able to ignore the tide within the school of the things that are changing. And if you can begin to show some results, whatever that may be, some progress related to different starting points, then it might just be that instead of luck, it's turned into hard work, and you're all of a sudden you're 9 years down the road, and you've created a culture that everyone's thriving in. But I do hear what you're saying. It's all very good for you, isn't it? You've had a lovely time. You've written a book about it as well. You must be experts, and it's just not that at all. We've tried to fill it with a multiplicity of voices from all types of settings and backgrounds and cultures, and just try and go, what's it like for you as a deputy? And some of them have gone privately, or my head teacher would never allow me to say this, or I had to leave because of that. And what we really wanted to do was not paint a picture that all head teachers are tricky tricksters who are stick in the muds and Backstreet Boys, we want it that way type stuff. But if you do find yourself in that position, going back to your question, I don't believe the majority of it will be down to luck. it'll be hard work. It'll be the swan, a lot of kicking underneath. And I believe it's possible. We believe it's possible for everybody to carve that space out.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I asked the post the question, it's very much a case of those people who get in touch with me on a regular basis can sometimes be in quite difficult situations. So there was no element of me doubting the sort of the validity or the quality of your proposals. But just a case of, I think you've been able to demonstrate that actually it's not situation dependent. If you want to make a difference, there are ways that you can take control of this. And I think taking control is almost like this big TDAPA theme that we've got run through the last 5 years, where, in a system that is, wildly out of control in some respects, teachers and leaders can still be the change they want to be in that system. So hopefully that was interpreted in the spirit that it was offered, because I know that someone will be listening going, well, can I do something? And hopefully then I listen to that response and go, actually, yeah, I can do something, because that's really what we want, is those people who think that there may be no hope in things, that actually there is a bit.
I'd say I've absolutely been there as well, absolutely been there, and sometimes it's difficult to kind of find and to believe that you've kind of got the power to do something about it in that instance as well. But I guess where I've gotten to in the past is just, well, what's your alternative, really? You obviously never go so far that things are going to get really, really difficult and unpleasant for you. But I've been at the point before where I've thought, right, either this is going to change, or I'm gonna leave. That wasn't the situation that I'm in right now, by the way, just as I'm about to go and join a new school. But I've been in that situation before and kind of thought, right, let's have one like big roll of the dice. Let's have that conversation with the head. Like, this is how I see it. This is how I see we could take things forward. I really want to be a part of that, but like, can we? Like, it is ultimately your school, your decision. Like, can we do that? And if they say no, if they go, well, no, I just don't see it that way, at least then you've got the absolute certainty that, okay, it's definitely it's right for me to move on. I think sometimes as well you can work with heads who have got a very, very clear way of doing things that's very, very different from yours, but they're still kind of happy for you to operate in your role in the way that's comfortable for you. I had a head teacher like that at the school that I'm currently at now. She was only there 6 months. She was only ever gonna be there 6 months. I've got a great relationship with her, still stay in touch with her. But like, we were like really, really, really different, and not different in a way where you go, oh yes, I bet you really complimented each other nicely. Like, we didn't really. Like, any situation, like, we would see things like really, really differently. So we just went, okay, like, you do these things in your way, and I'll do these things over here in my way. And then, we ended up just with a really great relationship. Not ideal, and probably in the long term, like, it would have needed to have some kind of like proper agreed like way forward that was a little bit more aligned. But over the short term, I think it can, people find ways of making things work when people talk to people, and that's at the heart of all of it, right? It's people.
I think one really important thing, because Adam's kind of segued into that idea of establishing that relationship with your head teacher, and which, by the way, Kieran, I didn't take it in any other way in other than the spirit in which it was meant. It's I get it. I think it's part of the reason why I jumped is because it's part of our kind of paranoid fear of letting this kind of 250-page tome out into the world, and people go, oh, I think you know what you're talking about, do you? So we're always like, well, actually, no, it's just kind of it's our opinion and our lived experience through the lens of all these others. But what I found, particularly with my head teacher, was she's got a very clear vision for the school, and she's got a very clear idea of the ethos and the culture and the motto. It was all very, very clear. And for us, it was rethinking education with music at its heart, the music specialist school. And as long as everything I did could align to that, as long as I could say, these are the reasons why I'm doing this, this is how the teachers are working. And if she took the time to listen and get that kind of that buy-in at the top of the school, you're able to have that conversation. So if you've got a head who is a bit bullish and they're bullish out of protectionism because, I don't know, they've got a couple of bad Ofsteds, or, you know, they're working their 17-hour days and they've got a lot going on, and you're this kind of jumped up deputy trying to, I listened to Chris and Adam on that podcast and I'm going to carve my way, then it's about sitting down with that person and just kind of going, these are the things I'm looking at, how can I align to have that conversation, how can I align to what you want, these are the things I think the school needs, what do you think? And I don't think there's any harm in having that as a bit of an ideal, as a bit of a kind of naive, and openly naive, and just kind of going, look, it really is possible. But, you know, Adam and I, we hear very similar stories to the ones that you do, I would imagine, Kieran. And some of them, you know, you've got teachers who are on the brink of walking out. They don't know what to do. They feel crushed. They feel depressed. They're you know, being held accountable in all these different areas. And what we would never claim is this one size fits all. But your original question answers it. It is a mind shift. It's a mindset shift, and you've got to be actively doing something to make a change, because if you just sit in it, you will just kind of bed rot in those ideas. And like I said, none of us are getting out of bed to go and do something actively wrong or bad. And so that kind of positive action and putting that back into the workplace with the people and the team and the relationship you've been building, it'll take time, but we believe it'll reap dividends.
I love the level of passive aggression you're ascribing to your future readers already. You know, I've never, I've often thought about them being extremely bored when reading my work.
Quick break, and don't worry, this one's worth your time. If you've ever looked at a new paper, policy, or book and thought, I'd love to read that, just not tonight, Hey, What You Reading For was made for you. It's our weekly newsletter for teachers who want to stay sharp without drowning in PDFs. Curating the best research, articles, and podcasts from across education with a short read that actually respects your time. It's free, it's evidence-informed, and it's written for teachers who are time-poor but enthusiasm-rich. You can sign up now at thinkingdeeply.info.
I think, Chris, you've already mentioned sort of the people you drew on, you know, and my understanding is that you used lots of case studies and real examples throughout the book. Was there a story or scenario that you thought best captures the essence of effective deputy headship? And is there anything listeners could really take from that story, from that case study?
Yeah, there was one that really stuck out. We were very lucky to be able to reach out to some really influential voices that were able to give us some opinions and some viewpoints, either outside of school system or within school systems. Spoke to a couple of deputy heads who had kind of worked their way up. One of the people we spoke to was Gwyn ap Harry, who is the CEO of the XP Trust, which is a set of outstanding schools up in Northumbria, Cumbria, that neck of the world, quite north. And he gave us a story about how kind of power can corrupt. He's a bit like Macbeth, to be honest with you. He kind of offered his deputy CEO the role of CEO, and his deputy stepped up, and he kind of misread. It's kind of talking about what I was talking about earlier. He just entrusted his deputy without asking for physical proof, because the answer was always, "Oh, do you not trust me?" kind of thing. And he realized that having that kind of transactional relationship was important, because he didn't do the checks and balances. It's kind of like the warning story that comes at the end of all these positive things we're saying, because if left unchecked, if this deputy head, as a deputy head, if you're sat there carving out this space for yourself, if you are carving too deeply and too quickly, and you aren't looking after those relationships, and you aren't doing 360 checks, and you aren't checking in with your head teacher, you'll end up like the story Gwyn was telling, where he had to come back as CEO because it nearly destroyed the trust. And he talks about this openly in the book. He talks about it openly in another podcast as well. And we just reached out to him and said, would you like to offer any advice? And he's kind of, it's quite early on in the book, and it's a bit of a shot across the bows to talking about kind of unchecked power which is what it is. Leadership is a type of power. Whether you are a person leader and you're like, I'm sharing it all, you still have it to give out. And if you don't want to share that, you can keep it to yourself and just walk around and go, I can exclude you, if I wanted to. I don't think there's any deputies in the land that are like that, but you could. And that really hit home for me, because it was like a really good non-example of how not to be a deputy, which we found quite original and quite a unique take. Because in the end, ambition and blind ambition, even if it was for the good of the school, moved so far from the original intent and the school and the system and the culture and the society and the community that Gwyn had built, that it damn near destroyed it. And so I think there's any deputies or people going, I really want to be a deputy, sometimes looking at the why you want that leadership. I really wanted to be a head teacher, but it wasn't because I wanted to run a school. It was because I had lots of ideas about how to work with everybody. I was excited. Yes, it was a nice personal opportunity to get that promotion, to have that ability to continue to shape a culture and go, let's continue the legacy. It wasn't, I can't wait to be head teacher so I can change everything because I'm in power now. And actually, in a way, I was a bit reticent about the whole thing, which I think is a good sign. I didn't run into it going, I'm the boss, because it's a job that's doing its best to end my not very long life so far. But I don't know, Adam, have you got one that's different to mine?
I think for me, it's probably the stories that aren't in there, and I think it's since writing the book, or since finishing the book, we've had conversations with so many deputies who think like, oh, like we should do another volume of this with your story in there. So it's the likes of Shannon Doherty, who we didn't know at the point of writing the book, and Ella Martin as well, who we didn't know, Adam Woodward, like just so many others we could name who are really inspiring people, who are really passionate about what it is that they do, and have got a very distinct story about them as well. On our podcast, we always ask about what's your story, so like how did you get here, and that's always like my favorite bit of the podcast, because it gives that insight into like how people have come to be where they are, and that gives a real insight into like people's professional identities, and that's something I'm just super passionate about. So I think we're hoping that even for the deputies that didn't make contributions to the book, they'll still like see their part of their journey reflected in the stories of others as well. But it's just been so interesting just hearing all of the different stories that different deputies have got and are willing to share. And I think that, I suppose one last thing I'd say on it is just that I think the different stories and the richness of the different approaches, and actually the difference in like what does it mean to succeed as a deputy head, like that's different for lots of different people. And sometimes you can think that it means one thing for you, and then you can end up actually going a completely different direction. So like Chris and I our stories are relatively interesting on that. So Chris applied for the head's job at his school and got it, and is now the head teacher. I applied for the head's job at my school and didn't get it, and I've been working with the person that did get it for the last year and a half, and that's that's been great. It's been really great, and we have a really strong relationship, and particularly around that issue actually of the fact that I applied for it, and so she asked me a little while ago, like, what would you ever want to be the Prime Minister? I was like, yeah, I'd quite like to have a go at that actually. And she said, well, you wouldn't get it if I applied, would you? So, which I thought was like, it was just such a nice moment, because you're like, yeah, like we've actually like properly embraced that, like that part of our story together. So yeah, the long and short of that is that succeeding as a deputy head for some people means becoming a head. For others, it doesn't. And like now, my next step isn't being a head teacher. It's doing something else, and then maybe I'll circle back to being a head teacher at some point in the future as well. So if the key message of the book, if the one thing you take from the book is actually that it's for me as the reader to decide what succeeding as a deputy head means, and I can take inspiration from one or two or three of these different perspectives that these brilliant people who have contributed to the book are offering, I think that would be the thing that we would most like people to take.
Fantastic. I mean, case studies when they're done well can be really, really powerful, really moving. And I think I'm not sure what the source is, but like the window and the mirror. You almost at some point stop thinking about what's actually happening in the case study and start thinking about yourself. And then there's a lot of power for reflection through someone else's story. So I think I think that'll be of immense value.
If you're trying to keep up with artificial intelligence without losing your Sundays, subscribe to Teacher Prompts by Neil Almond. It's a weekly AI briefing for teachers, a quick scan of what matters, classroom-ready prompt to try, and plain English explainers of the latest features. It's free, written with teachers in mind. Sign up at news.teacherprompts.ai.
You actually did start to touch on this. A lot of deputies see the role as both a destination and a springboard. Now, Chris, you said you wanted to be a head teacher. I understood very early on that I did not that didn't interest me, and that when I go back into school, I'll probably go in as deputy head again, or just teaching maths. One of those two options would be my dream scenario. Just do all the maths in the school, and like a small one form entry. But lots of people will think, okay, I want to push on for headship. Do you have any advice for anyone who's aspiring to headship, and about how they can best use their deputyship as a period of deliberate professional growth, rather than just preparation for the next level? And I know that Adam and Chris, this is something you both have spoken about, but it may even feed into where you're going with your doctoral studies, Adam, if I'm right in thinking, or certainly along those lines.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the question around how can you use it for as a deliberate preparation. I think I'll pass to Chris on this one first, because as I say, like he actually has successfully used his deputy headship to prepare for headship, whereas I didn't get one. So go on, Chris, you start.
It's very, very magnanimous of you, Adam. I think, I mean, first of all, this was, we had a lot of conversations about how to structure the book, and we went back and forth. We've spent a year editing it now with the publisher. And that's been a really exciting journey to try and work out what we wanted to say and what's going to sell. And those were all these different kind of conversations. And one of those was, one of the chapters is, developing yourself and how you're going to get there. I think focusing on depth and integrity in your current role is probably a priority, because if you can demonstrate integrity and loyalty to the post you currently hold, and you're striving to do the good work, the bread and butter work, whatever that is in that role, day in, day out, you're driven by the inherent value of the job, it's potentially reassuring to professionals around you that you take the time to master your current role, that you are in that bubble rather than rushing preparation for the next post. So it isn't about, you can do an NPQH whilst being a deputy head or an assistant head. And these days, because of kind of how ubiquitous these courses are, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going for headship. And in fact, I know a couple of people on my course that never wanted to be a head teacher, and that's kind of what the NPQA has shown them. And that's just as good. I think it's also important to seek breadth of contextual experience. So in the book, we've got executive head teacher Swabra Lloyd. She talks about deliberately expanding experience across diverse contexts. So schools of varying sizes, structures. Now, I couldn't do that because I work in a very specific school. So what I did was, and this wasn't to become a head teacher, this was to develop my current role, right? Was I went and found governorship in another school, in a school that was the exact opposite of mine, a massive secondary school. I'm now the chair of governors of that school. That has given me kind of financial acumen, strategic acumen, the understanding that massive difference between strategic and operational. But it wasn't to become a head teacher. These actions that I did were never feeding that. It was to feed my current role and to go, well, do you know what? I might be able to bring this back to the school. So what my team around me would have seen was, oh, Chris is off to another meeting. Yeah, but when he gets back, oh, by the way, we've got all the school I've just been out, they're going to help us with our music moderation. And would you mind going over and doing a bit of, bringing these things in? It was never me making a list of, well, here's what I've done and this is why I deserve to be a head teacher. What it did was it made people trust me that I was in a role that I wasn't necessarily going to leave, because it was that inherent day in, day out, fidelity to the job, fidelity to the role, not looking to up and out. And I think it's because if you are strategic about your personal development and your professional development, so you're doing your formal qualifications that take a couple of years, that aligns with your why, your long-term career goals. If you are reading widely, you're engaging with research, and you're doing the best in the now, that kind of aligns ambition with action, as opposed to just being, I'm going to be a head teacher and I'm going to be a head teacher of this school or another school, because actually what people want is you in the now. And that doesn't matter whether you in the now is reading to year 6 or it's sat at the head of the table, signing off the budget, looking at mass redundancies, or wondering how we're going to pay for this, or the toilet's blocked and you're doing that. The integrity and depth and your loyalty to the current thing you are doing, I think, is one of the best ways to show that you're ready, almost.
I'd agree with everything you said there, Chris. I think about, the kind of intentionality of what you do as a deputy to prepare you for what comes next. And I think, Kieran, you were saying about it being a springboard. I think sometimes, though, being a deputy is a really good space for you to be in, to try and figure out what the next thing for you to do is. And you said, Kieran, that when you were a deputy, you kind of quite quickly realised you didn't want to be a head. I think what I realised in my time as a deputy in my current school is that I really, really would have wanted to be the head at that school. And my school definitely made the right choice in picking the head teacher that they did instead of me. She's a much better head teacher than what I would have been. But I really wanted to be the head teacher in that school. I'm not sure I certainly don't have yet the same kind of burning urge to be a head teacher anywhere else. It was very much about that community. And, I know Chris's community is super important to him as well. And I think actually that reflecting on Chris being the head teacher in his school and me applying for the headship in my school actually really helped me to think, actually, those are 2 examples of like really needing to be in the right place. So perhaps deputy headship isn't about like find your next role, but maybe it is more about find your next place, or find the place that you want to be in. And if you're in that place as head teacher, happy days. If you're in that place as deputy, like absolutely fine. But I think, it definitely does give you the space to think, right, what kind of organization, what kind of community do I want to work in? And then worry about the role afterwards, I would say.
Alluded to earlier, I'm now a head teacher. It's now October half term in 2025, and I have never done a harder job in my entire life. And I don't know how head teachers of 2,000 students do it. It's all consuming. I love it. I love it with every fiber of my being. But the fidelity to my current role is the only thing that is helping me in my headship role, because the skills that I learned as a deputy head haven't necessarily transferred over, because some new relationships have had to have been started. My head teacher is now my executive head teacher. Now that is a very different relationship, because now we have more schools. We have a second school that she's opening. So that role has changed. I now have a deputy head who got a cheeky look at the book. She was like, "I'll take this home and see what I can learn." And our relationship is different, but it's brilliant, and it's kind of, we have our own skills. But the only thing that prepared me for this was having no idea what to do and relying on my previous practice as a deputy head and building on the lessons that I'd learned there, because I brought 9 years of experience into the 1st of September 2025, and it was like I'd never stepped into a school. So the advice for aspiring to headship is, the longer you take working on yourself as a person, however woolly that sounds, that's all I had walking into that room, because the kids knew I was now their head teacher. They were wonderful. I sat in front of them and I was talking about being resilient in the new school year, and I've been potentially accused of using that as in a bit of an ableist way. Some of our young people deal with social emotional issues, and they have some of them are very proudly autistic. They call themselves neurospicy. Very proud to be part of that family. And being resilient, I was trying to say, is a positive thing. It's important to try and to show those I did of strength, and I was just saying it's okay to be scared. It's good. I want you to feel scared, and I want you to feel happy and sad. So I'm absolutely terrified. I'm sat in front of you. I've never done this job before. They were like, really, sir? Are you scared? Like, yeah, I am. Like, you're all looking at me. But prior to this, I'd spoken to the staff and gone, this is it. You know, this is a new day. It's really, really exciting. Let's go. If I'd have gone into them and gone, guys, I'm terrified. I don't know how, you know. So once again, it's that kind of that thing I was talking about earlier about judging that level of vulnerability or authenticity you're going to give. But I knew myself, and I knew that I had to share that with the kids so that they gave me a little bit of slack, so that they were going to listen to my ideas about how I wanted to change some things. So if you're out there thinking, I want to be a head teacher, my advice is, do you know who you are? Are you okay sitting in a chair on your own? Are you okay in your own thoughts? Are you okay with making decisions, thinking slowly and acting fast, which is another thing we talk about? If you're okay with those things and you're surrounded by a good team, and you can come home and cry a little bit, being completely open there, then you're going to do brilliantly. And that, for me, is all about having an iterative process in your own professional development, in your own practice, staying true to your job, being the very best version of you can be, because being a head teacher is another world. And I'm very, very privileged to be part of that world. And I'm really excited to be talking to and listening to other head teachers who've been doing it for a lot longer than I have. Because it is a privilege, isn't it, I guess? And it, like Adam says, it's not for everybody. I guess we could steal from Disney, and it's doing, I've said it once, but it's doing the next right thing, I think. So if you want to be ahead, it's about where, not necessarily when.
But Disney, I mean, they're quite litigious, so hope you say that in your podcast too, so we can both get doubly sued.
Yeah, I say, I promise in the next episode, I'll say it 5 times across the episode.
I think that's probably one of the, you know, it's almost, it's transient, but it's really, really important, is that you're not going to realize until the 1st of September, you know, because you make whatever plans you want during the summertime. I think we were briefly talking about this earlier, but nothing makes it past first contact, you know, and it's a lot of the job is responded. When I say I realized I'd never want to be a head teacher, massive respect for those who do the role. I was lucky enough to spend a lot of time with a lot of great head teachers, and I saw the dedication they had, but it was dedication to a very different very different role to the one I wanted to perform in school. You know, like teacher development, you know, supporting pupils in their learning, and taking the strategic pedagogic sort of thing. That's always been my thing. That's the thing that sort of gets me out of bed in the morning. I think to be a head teacher, like you say, in 2025, Chris, you have to really want to do it, you know, because it is, you know, I don't think things have ever been as unforgiving, you know, and I do hope that there's a corner to turn as a profession, because, you know, I think we're very lucky to have the head teachers we do have now. But I think the system probably needs to give them a bit of a helping hand / break, and just to make sure that we still have those head teachers in 2035, you know, so that's where I was coming from. I normally caveat that, but I'm hoping that eventually the listeners will know that that's what I mean when I say it, rather than just saying, "Oh, it's a rubbish role." No, I don't want that.
I think that's a really, really, really interesting point, and an important point to make about like the quality of head teachers that we've got and the importance of hanging on to them as well. And I think what you're saying, Kieran, as well, is like, you know, you've got to be really in touch with what you want to do day to day in your life, and then decide if head teacher is the right thing for you. And funnily enough, part of the reason why I'm quite grateful, I think, as probably most of my school community are, that my head teacher got the job instead of me, is because I wouldn't have been able to put to one side teacher development, curriculum, the learning side of things. I just wouldn't have been able to do it, and I'd have probably missed something else. Whereas my head teacher just doesn't miss a thing. And yeah, I think that's it's interesting, isn't it? Like sometimes you get to those points where you think, actually, that's either A, why I don't want to do it, or B, why I'm not ready to do it, because I'm not ready to let go. Sometimes we can say we're not ready, and that feels like, oh, I'm missing something. But sometimes it's like, no, I'm just not ready to let go of this really, really cool interest that I've got. And
yeah, I mean, the one thing throughout this conversation has been, You're making me really miss the day to day. And I know that I know whenever I've got this curricular work that I'm trying to do, and because I think there's a problem that needs solving, but in no part of my mind am I not at some point going to go back into school, because I there's no point in spending all that time getting good at it and then not doing it. Just as you've got to the point where you think, oh, actually, I may have a bit of this sussed, and obviously that's a very dangerous place to be anyway, isn't it? But I really enjoy it. So yeah, speaking to you guys, I'm thinking, oh, I'm looking forward to when I do go back in, because there's so much in those. It's the everyday interactions with people that make the biggest difference, and make things worth. And like you both described teams in situations where you've really got to want to be there. You've really got you want to be part of that team driving things forward, and I don't think there's anything more special than that. So I think anyone who is interested in moving into deputy headship, I think, or is there and they're wondering how they got there, I think they'll really be looking forward to reading succeeding as a deputy head, which I believe is released in January, unless things have changed. Am I right in thinking that?
Yeah,
January.
It's coming out. Yeah, 15th of January with Bloomsbury. It's actually part of the succeeding as range. I was going to say about that because Adam touched on it earlier. What is succeeding and what is success, and I think what we've tried to do is distill that down into it's what it looks like for you, not necessarily for everybody else. And yeah, we're really, really proud of it. It's been a labour of love. And Adam lives in London. I live in Worcestershire. So we've. Do you remember that band? Was it the Postal Service where they used to write songs via the? We're that, but it's the Google Drive, and that's how we wrote it. I think that's how most people write books these days. But yeah, we used to have virtual Saturday coffee mornings over a laptop and hashing out chapters and stuff. So it's been a labour of love, but we really hope that people are able to take something, at least something from it, that will help them either affirm where they are or confirm where they are, or kind of help them onto the next step.
And the headline as well for this podcast is clearly that Kieran Mackle does want to go back into schools and be a deputy head. So like maybe that, yeah. The tagline of the podcast could be like Mr. Mackle's on the market or something like that. There's your seller.
That's what I mean. Not quite yet. Not quite yet. Like I say, there are like I say, maths curricular problems to solve before we go anywhere near that. But there's plenty of time, because one of the things about starting my own business is that my wife has had more time to focus on her career, and she essentially put it on hold for 6 years when we had our kids. And now that they're getting towards the end of primary school, she's been she's really flourishing in her role, and so there's almost like a trade off. If you have both parents who are working flat out, things are a lot harder, aren't they? So I've been able to do like school runs and things like that. So we'll see how things go. But a teaching career can last for many, many years. I'm not yet 40, so I've got plenty of time before I need to even think about that.
Yeah, you got time. We got time.
So 15th of January. That's 2 days before the next Stop a London conference. Are you guys joining us?
Well, I put in the application, so hopefully, I don't know if it'll get in, but if you accept me, I would very much love to be there. Chris has got a really good excuse for why he's not there.
Yeah, my newborn child will probably be about 2 weeks old by that point.
We can start a crash.
I'll go let her know. I'm off to London. You can bring the baby. Yeah, so my Christmas is going to brilliantly look a bit different this year. So I think Adam will be there in spirit for us, and I will be sat on a sofa. Yeah, hopefully loving life.
Well, congratulations, and looking forward to hearing all about it at the March iteration. But I think one of the great things about the conferences is that we've almost got this group of regular contributors, who are there all, if not all the time, more often than not. And I think the community element is one of the best, because we're all learning from each other. And like you said at the very start, there's no one way to think about things. It's just as long as we're thinking about education, that's the main thing. So when we stop thinking, that's when things get dangerous. So January 15th, book's published. What's your cadence on EduPulse? Do you guys do like 6-week blocks during term time, or how would you describe when people can check out the podcast?
Yeah, so with EduPulse, we've basically got two main strings to it. So we've got the series which from the chalk face, which is where we talk to serving leaders and teachers. And we have another series called From the Chalk Face. From the Thought Space. So that's where we talk to people who are maybe working in research or policy, consultants, that kind of thing. Because we think that there's absolutely a space for everybody in the conversation. We think it's really important to elevate the voice of teachers and leaders, but we also think it's important that we hear from people in that kind of more thinking space as well. So typically we'll put an episode out we aim for every week or every other week, and it will be either from the Chalk Face or from the Thought Space. And in the intervening week, we do Coaching Unpacked as well, which we do with Sarah Cottingham, which is another sort of podcast that EduPulse produces. And then we've got like a blog that comes out weekly as well. So lots of stuff for people to kind of engage with and talk about. And that's what it's about, really. For us, it's broadening the conversation.
Fantastic. I mean, I think the Venn diagram is probably there's quite a big overlap, but hopefully more of an overlap. If anyone has been there's Chris and Adam, I'll go check their work out, because I think we're all definitely operating in the same space and thinking about the similar things with similar level of gusto. So definitely I'll make sure there are links in the newsletter and in the podcast. On Spotify I can do this cool thing where you say like also recommends, and then I can search your names, and it'll come up in the description. I'll show you guys if you haven't seen that before.
I didn't know that. We can go back and edit some of the episodes. That's really interesting. But I like Kieran. We can't speak highly enough of you and TDAPE, and particularly the conferences. Being to Wales as the last one, and we had a conversation there, didn't we, about kind of occupying the same space. And it's thinking deeply is important, but just as important is, as you just said, the act of thinking. People actually just doing it and having conversations. And if you go to these things, I had no idea. I just sat down on my own having lunch because I was waiting for Adam, and Mary Myatt just sat down and said, "Hello, I'm Mary," and I'm like, "Oh Lord, where's Mary Myatt?"
I know.
Tried to play it completely cool. Mary was that lovely. What's your surname? Myatt. How nice to meet. What do you do? But there's no competition. There's no kind of why are you saying this if somebody else has already said it? There's a bit of a thought thing out there of why would you write about this if somebody else has already written about it? What we really believe as a core is that everybody has a voice. We've got some projects coming up that we hope are going to be championing the voices of regular people who are the backbone of our education system, our TAs and our teachers. That's from the Chalk Face in the podcast, but also some other projects we've got coming up. So I just think it's the more we can talk, the more we can talk to each other and then to other people, as long as we're all listening at the same time. I can't think of anything better to do with our time or anything more important.
It's very kind of you, and I totally agree. Because it must have been like 4 or 5 times I read about retrieval practice before I actually understood what it really was. So you need multiple exposures to different ideas, and everyone comes to things in a slightly different way with their own sort of preconceptions and things. So I think you're absolutely spot on. And you guys have given me so much of your Monday night. I can't thank you enough. All I have to do is say thank you very much for joining me. Thank you very much, Chris.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Adam.
Absolute pleasure. Career goal fulfilled.
And everyone at home, until next time, thanks for listening.